I spent 33 years playing the grateful daughter in our picture-perfect Briar Glen home. But that script burned to ash over braised short ribs. When my mother stood up to toast my birthday, she didn't offer love. Instead, she laughed and told the table I was adopted for tax benefits. She treated it like a punchline, but as the room went dead silent, I realized it was the only truth she had ever told me. The wood paneling inside the private dining room at Hearth and Pine smelled of roasted rosemary and old money. It was a scent that defined the better parts of Briar Glen, the kind of town where people mowed their lawns in diagonal stripes and kept their family secrets behind double-paned storm windows. I sat at the head of the long walnut table and smoothed the napkin over my lap for the 5th time. 33. I said the number in my head, testing its weight. It felt substantial, solid. 33 was an age where you were supposed to have traction. I had a career as a strategy consultant that paid for the oversized cashmere sweater I was wearing. I had an apartment that did not smell like damp drywall. I had a plan. I had planned tonight down to the minute. This dinner was not just a birthday celebration. It was a tactical maneuver. In the Parker family, peace was not a natural state. It was something you engineered with precise seating charts and expensive wine. I had invited only 6 people. My father, Grant, who was currently studying the wine list with the intensity of a man looking for a trapdoor. My Aunt Celeste, my mother's sister, who was shredding a bread roll with nervous fingers. Her husband, Uncle Roy, who was already 2 scotches deep, and my 2 closest friends, Naomi and Mark, who sat on my left like a human shield. And then there was the empty chair at the other end of the table. My mother was 40 minutes late. "You look beautiful, Lila," Naomi said, leaning in. Her voice was low, pitched to cut under the ambient jazz. "Relax. The food is ordered. If she makes a scene, I will personally spill a glass of Cabernet on her white blouse." I smiled, but my chest felt tight. Marlene Parker did not need a reason to make a scene. She was the scene. She is just running on Marlene time. My father said without looking up from the menu. "Traffic is terrible near the mall." "There is no traffic, Dad." I said, "It is Tuesday." He finally looked at me. His eyes were gray and watery, permanently etched with the fatigue of a man who had spent 30 years managing a hurricane. He looked older tonight. The skin around his jaw was slack, and his suit jacket seemed a size too large, hanging off his shoulders like a borrowed coat. "She will be here," he said, as if summoned by his resignation. The heavy oak doors swung open. The room seemed to shrink instantly. My mother stood in the frame, breathless and radiant, wearing a silk dress the color of crushed berries. She was holding a massive gift bag that glittered under the recessed lighting. She did not look 62. She looked like a force of nature that had decided to be gracious for an hour. "So sorry, everyone," she announced, her voice projecting to the back of the room. She breezed past the hostess who was trying to take her coat. "You know how the parking valet is here? Absolute chaos. I had to tell the boy 3 times to be careful with the Mercedes." She swept to the head of the table, my end of the table, and leaned down to kiss my cheek. Her perfume hit me first, a sharp floral scent that I associated with church pews and arguments in the car. "Happy birthday, darling," she said, her lips barely grazing my skin. "Thank you, Mom," I said. I stood up to hug her, but she was already moving past me, floating down the length of the table toward her seat, trailing her fingers along the backs of chairs. "Grant, tell me you ordered the appetizers," she said as she sat down. "I am famished. And this lighting is terrible. Can we turn it up? It looks like a funeral in here." "It is cozy, Marlene," Aunt Celeste said softly. "It is dim," my mother corrected. She snapped her fingers at a passing waiter. "Excuse me, young man, we need another bottle of the Pinot, the expensive one, and bring some sparkling water with lime, fresh lime, not the dried slices you people try to pass off as garnish." She flashed him a smile that was dazzling and terrifying in equal measure. The waiter nodded and scrambled away. Marlene settled in, adjusting her necklace. She looked around the table, her gaze lingering on everyone just long enough to make them sit up straighter. She had arrived late, contributed nothing to the planning, and paid for none of the meal. Yet within 30 seconds, she was holding court. She was the host. I was just the occasion. The appetizers arrived, tuna tartare and wild mushroom crostini, and the tension in the room began to ease slightly as mouths were filled. My mother told a long, animated story about a neighbor who had painted her front door a vulgar shade of turquoise. She was charming. This was the Marlene that people in Briar Glen knew, the vivacious woman who chaired charity committees and knew everyone's name. I watched her from the other end of the table. I tried to feel grateful. She was here. She was not yelling. She was not bringing up my single status or my recent weight fluctuation. This was a win. Then the entrees were cleared, and the waiter poured the champagne for the toast. My stomach did a slow roll. This was the danger zone. Marlene tapped her spoon against her glass. The crystal rang out, sharp and demanding. The restaurant chatter faded. Even the tables nearby quieted down. "Attention, everyone," she said, standing up. She held her glass high, the bubbles catching the light. I looked down at my hands. Just get through it. I told myself. Smile, nod, drink. I want to say a few words about our birthday girl. My mother began. Her voice was warm, dripping with theatrical affection. 33 years ago, Grant and I were sitting in a quiet house, wondering what our future would look like. We had the space, we had the means, but it was just so quiet. She looked at me, her eyes shimmering. "Lila, you changed everything for us. You really did." I felt a genuine warmth bloom in my chest. Maybe I had been too cynical. Maybe tonight really was different. "I remember when we brought you home," she continued, leaning forward against the table. She swirled her champagne. "You were such a serious little thing. Even then, you had that little frown you are wearing right now." I forced my face to relax. Naomi squeezed my knee under the table. "But honestly, looking back, it was the best decision we ever made," Marlene said, her smile widening. She chuckled. A low, throaty sound. You know, people always talk about the emotional journey of adoption. The waiting, the paperwork, the longing. She paused for effect. But let us be real for a second. We did not do it for the grand emotional journey. She looked around the table, inviting everyone in on the joke. "We did it for the tax benefits." She laughed. It was a bright, sharp laugh that expected company. "And my God, did we need the write-off that year?" Marlene exclaimed, gesturing with her glass. "The accountant said we needed a dependent, or the IRS was going to eat us alive. So, voila. Instant family." She took a sip of her champagne, beaming. The silence that followed was not the respectful silence of a pause. It was the silence of a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. I sat frozen. I could feel the blood draining from my face, leaving my skin cold and prickly. I waited for the punchline. I waited for the part where she said, "But then we fell in love with you," or "But you became our world." It did not come. Marlene just stood there, smiling, waiting for laughter that was not happening. Uncle Roy coughed into his fist. Aunt Celeste looked down at her lap, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. My father, Grant, was staring at his empty dessert plate with a rigidity that suggested he was trying to turn himself into stone. Naomi shifted in her seat, her body angling toward me aggressively, ready to fight. I felt a strange buzzing in my ears. Tax benefits. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. Marlene's humor was often cruel, but this was grotesque. And yet, looking at her face, I saw no softness. I saw a challenge. "Oh, come on," Marlene said, looking around the table with feigned exasperation. "You are all so serious. It is a joke. A little family humor. Lila gets it. Do you not, honey?" She looked at me. Her eyes were hard, bright beads. There was a warning in them. Do not ruin this. Do not be dramatic. I felt the heat rush back into my face, burning my cheeks. Every eye at the table was on me, darting away the moment I met their gaze. They were embarrassed for me. That was worse than the insult. They were pitying me. I gripped the stem of my wine glass. My fingers felt numb. I had two choices. I could cry, which would give her the victory of calling me unstable, or I could play the game. I forced the corners of my mouth up. It felt like I was lifting weights with my face. "Well," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady. "At least the IRS got something out of it. I would hate to think I was a total loss." I raised my glass. "To the write-off," I said. Marlene's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Just a glitch in the matrix. Before she recovered, "Exactly," she cried, clinking her glass against the air. "To the write-off." And to Lila, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She drank. I brought the glass to my lips, but I did not drink. I could not swallow. My throat had closed up. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of white noise. I went into autopilot. I cut my cake. I opened the gift bag, a scarf I would never wear. I thanked everyone. I laughed at the right moments. But inside, I had gone cold. My mind had detached from the room and was recording everything. I became a camera. I watched Marlene. She was giddy now, fueled by the attention of her shock tactic. She was flirting with the waiter again, oblivious to the frost in the room. I watched my father. Grant had not looked me in the eye since the toast. He was shredding his paper coaster into tiny wet pulp. His hands were shaking, not a lot, but enough that the tremors traveled up his fork. I watched Aunt Celeste. She was wiping her eyes with a napkin, pretending it was allergies. But when she looked at Marlene, there was no sisterly affection. There was fear. Pure, distilled fear. Why? Why was the room so terrified? If it was just a bad joke, they should be annoyed. They should be rolling their eyes. But they looked like they were waiting for a bomb to go off. The check came. I reached for it, but Grant snatched it up. "No," he muttered. "I have got it. Thank you." "Dad," I said. He nodded, still not looking at me. "Happy birthday, kiddo." We moved toward the exit. The cool air of the foyer felt like a blessing. I said my goodbyes to Naomi and Mark, hugging them longer than usual. "Call me later." Naomi whispered in my ear, "I mean it. Do not sit alone with this. I am fine." I lied. It is just Marlene being Marlene. I turned back to find my coat. The coat check closet was located down a short hallway, near the restrooms. As I walked toward it, I heard voices around the corner. It was my mother and Aunt Celeste. "You cannot say things like that." "Marlene," Celeste was hissing. Her voice was trembling. "It is reckless." "Oh, stop it," Marlene's voice replied. She sounded bored. "She has no sense of humor. Never has. She gets that from Grant. It is not about humor," Celeste said. "What if she starts asking?" "She won't ask anything." Marlene cut her off. "She is too busy being perfect. Besides, she should be grateful. She wouldn't have had anything without us. Nothing. She would be waiting tables in some roadside diner if we hadn't stepped in." The words hit me physically. It felt like a fist to the solar plexus. She wouldn't have had anything without us. It wasn't the arrogance. I was used to the arrogance. It was the transaction. The ledger. She spoke about me not as a daughter, but as an investment that was failing to yield the proper returns of gratitude. I stepped back, my heels silent on the plush carpet. I turned and walked the long way around to the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I did not say goodbye to my mother. I just waved to the group generally and walked out into the cool, dark parking lot. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat there for 10 minutes, just breathing, tax benefits. My apartment was quiet. It was a modern unit on the 3rd floor of a renovated mill building, exposed brick and clean lines, usually. This space made me feel calm. It was mine. I paid the mortgage. I picked the furniture. Tonight, it felt empty. I kicked off my heels and threw my bag on the sofa. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, drinking it standing over the sink. The echo of the restaurant followed me. The laughter, the silence. She wouldn't have had anything without us. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf, pushed back behind my winter duvets, was a wooden keepsake box. It was pine, simple, with a brass latch. I had not opened it in years. I pulled it down and sat on the floor. The wood cool against my legs. I clicked the latch open. Inside was the debris of a childhood, a dried corsage from prom, a ribbon from a spelling bee. A photo of me at 7 years old, missing a front tooth, standing in front of the massive oak tree at our old house, and at the bottom, in a manila envelope, the paperwork. I had seen these papers before. When I was 18, I needed them to apply for a passport. I had glanced at them, seen the words "Certificate of Adoption," and put them away. I had never scrutinized them. Why would I? I was Lila Parker. I knew who I was. I slid the papers out. There were 3 sheets. The first was a birth certificate. Lila Marie Parker. Born October 14th, 1992. Place of birth, St. Jude's Hospital. County, Mother, Marlene Parker. Father, Grant Parker. That was normal. Amended birth certificates were standard after adoption. It listed my adoptive parents as if they were biological. That was the law. I turned to the second page. This was the adoption decree. I laid it flat on the carpet. Final decree of adoption. I leaned in closer. The paper felt smooth, cheap. The font was an old Courier typewriter style. I scanned the text. In the matter of the adoption of female infant. I looked for the agency. Usually. There was a letterhead. Catholic Charities. Department of Social Services. Briar Glen Family Services. There was nothing. No logo. No letterhead at the top. Just plain white paper with text. I looked at the judge's signature at the bottom. It was a scrawl. Barely legible. Honorable J. T. Higgins. I frowned. I looked at the date of the decree. February 12th, 1993. I was 4 months old. I picked up the third sheet. It was stapled to the back of the decree. It looked different. The black toner was grainy, speckled with tiny white dots. The text was slightly crooked. It was a photocopy, and not a good one. It looked like a photocopy of a photocopy. It was a receipt of fees. Administrative processing, $2,500. Placement facilitation, $15,000. Legal retainer, $5,000. The numbers were typed, but the descriptions were vague. Placement facilitation? Who was facilitating? I held the paper up to the light. There was no watermark. I thought about the tax benefits joke. You claim an adoption tax credit when the adoption is finalized. You need documentation. You need a qualified agency or a private agreement that meets specific criteria. I looked at the papers again. They looked homemade. Not fake, exactly, but informal, like something you typed up to satisfy a school registrar. Not a federal court. A chill crawled up my spine. I grabbed my phone. It was almost 11 o'clock. I scrolled to Dad and hit call. He answered on the second ring. Hello? His voice was thick. He had probably been asleep, or pretending to be. Dad, it is Lila. Lila? Is everything okay? Are you home? I am home. Dad, I am looking at my adoption papers. There was a pause, a long, static-filled silence. I heard him shift the phone. Why are you doing that? Honey, it is late. Mom's joke. I said. It got me thinking. I wanted to see the date the adoption was finalized. Another pause. Lila, listen, your mom. She had too much wine. You know how she gets when she is nervous. She wanted the night to be perfect and she tried to be funny and it landed wrong. She did not mean it like that. I looked at the grainy photocopy in my lap. Dad, I said, keeping my voice level. Who was the agency? What? The agency. Who handled the adoption? There is no letterhead on the decree. It was a long time ago. Lila, he said. His voice was rising in pitch. A private arrangement. A lawyer handled it. Which lawyer? I do not remember. Some guy in the city? Look, why does this matter? You are my daughter. That is what matters. Dad, I said, the paper looks like a copy. Do we have the originals? Lila, stop. The sharpness in his voice startled me. It was not anger. It was panic. Please, he said. Quieter now. Just put the box away. Do not let her get in your head. She is just difficult. But we love you. He was begging me. I am tired. Dad, I said softly. Yeah, me too. Go to bed. Honey, we will talk later. He hung up before I could say goodbye. I stared at the phone. My father was a man who avoided conflict at all costs. But he was also a man of detail. He was an architect before he retired. He kept blueprints from 30 years ago. He labeled his spice rack. The idea that he would not remember the lawyer who gave him his daughter was impossible. He was lying. I dialed Naomi. She picked up immediately. I knew you were not going to sleep. I'm looking at the papers. Naomi, I said, and they are weird. No letterhead. A receipt that looks like it was typed on a typewriter in a basement. And I just called my dad and he practically begged me to stop asking questions. Naomi let out a long breath. Okay, she said. Okay, let's back up. Leela, what do you actually remember? What do you mean? I mean about the story, the narrative. Most adopted kids have a story. We flew to China to get you, or we met your birth mom at a diner. What is yours? I closed my eyes. I tried to summon the memory of the story. They always said. I started, then hesitated. They said it was a private situation, that my birth mother was young, a college student who could not keep me. They said they heard about me through a friend of a friend. Which friend? Naomi asked. I do not know. Did you ever see a picture of her? No. It was a closed adoption. Okay, Naomi said. That happens. But Lila, think about it. Whenever you asked about it growing up, what happened? I thought back to the few times I had pressed for details. Once when I was 10, once when I was 16, Marlene would get emotional. I said slowly. She would cry. She would say I was ungrateful for asking, that it hurt her feelings because she was my real mother, so I stopped asking. Because you were trained to stop, Naomi said. I looked at the blurry receipt again. Placement facilitation, Naomi, I said. My mom joked about tax benefits. But what if it was not a joke? What if it was money? What kind of money? I do not know. But Dad sounded scared. Not annoyed, scared. Lila, listen to me, Naomi said. You are brilliant. You are capable. But you are also right in the blast radius right now. Do not do anything impulsive. I am not going to be impulsive. I said, I am going to be thorough. I hung up. I sat there in the silence of my apartment. The papers spread out like a map of a country I did not recognize. I had spent 33 years trying to be the perfect daughter to make up for a deficit I did not understand. I had tried to be worth the investment. My phone buzzed again. A text message. I looked at the screen. It was Marlene. You always take things too seriously. It was a compliment. I meant you were a blessing when we needed one. Stop sulking. It is unbecoming. I read it twice. It was a compliment. She was gaslighting me via text message. It was classic Marlene. Rewrite history, assign blame, demand normalcy. Usually, I would reply. I would say, I know. Mom, sorry. Good night. I would smooth it over. I would play the role. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I looked at the papers. I looked at the line. Placement executed under private agreement. I did not type a reply. Instead, I took a screenshot of the message. I opened my photo gallery and created a new album. I typed in the name, Truth. I moved the screenshot into the folder. Then I took a photo of the birth certificate, moved it to the folder. I took a photo of the adoption decree, moved it to the folder. I took a photo of the receipt, moved it to the folder. I closed the box and shoved it back into the closet. Behind the winter coats, I was not going to sulk. I was not going to cry. I was going to find out who facilitated a $15,000 placement for a baby in 1993, and why my mother thought that was a punchline. I went to the kitchen and turned off the lights. The city glowed outside my window, indifferent and vast. Happy birthday to me. The morning after the dinner, the sun came up over Briar Glen just as it always did, bright, entitled, and indifferent to the wreckage in my living room. I had not slept. I had spent the hours between midnight and dawn staring at the ceiling, replaying the sound of my mother's laugh. Tax benefits. It was a joke. It had to be a joke, but the paperwork in the box said otherwise. The lack of an agency letterhead said otherwise. I decided to start with the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy was safe. It was rules and forms and processing times. It was a language I spoke fluently. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee and opened my laptop. I navigated to the state's vital records portal. I needed an official, certified copy of my birth certificate, not the one in the box, but a fresh one, straight from the source. I filled out the fields: name, date of birth, mother's maiden name, social security number. I clicked submit. Usually, a confirmation screen would pop up with an estimated delivery date. Instead, the screen flashed gray. A small red box appeared at the top. Error code 404. Record requires restricted archival handling. Please contact the county clerk directly. I stared at the screen. Restricted archival handling. I had ordered birth certificates for clients before. I had ordered death certificates, marriage licenses, and property deeds. I had never seen that specific error message. I closed the laptop. Fine. If the digital door was locked, I would use the physical one. I showered, dressed in a sharp navy blazer and trousers, my armor, and drove to the Briar Glen Public Records Office. It was located in the basement of the town hall, a brick building that smelled of floor wax and history. The clerk was a woman I vaguely recognized, someone who had likely been scanning documents since the Reagan administration. Her name tag read, Patricia. "Can I help you?" she asked, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "I need a certified copy of my long-form birth certificate." I said, "My name is Lila Parker." Patricia sighed, typed my name into her terminal, and waited. I watched her reflection in the plexiglass divider. She blinked. Then she blinked again. Her posture changed. She sat up straighter, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Parker," she said. "Marlene and Grant's daughter?" "Yes," I said. She looked at me then. It was a quick, assessing glance, devoid of the usual small-town warmth. She cleared her throat and pushed her chair back. "I cannot print this here," she said. "Why not?" I asked. "It is a public record. It is flagged," she said. Her voice was clipped. "It is marked for judicial review only. You have to file a petition with the family court if you want to unseal the full file. I am not asking for the adoption file." I said, keeping my voice calm. "I am asking for my amended birth certificate, the one that lists the Parkers as my parents. That is a legal identity document. You should be able to print it." Patricia stood up. She looked nervous. "The system will not let me," she said. "It says contact administrator. And frankly, Miss Parker, I do not have the authority to override a judge's seal. You will have to leave." She was acting as if I had asked for nuclear launch codes. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "No," she said, too quickly. "Just protocol. Have a nice day." She turned her back to me and started shuffling papers that did not need shuffling. I walked out into the bright sunlight. My receipt for the parking meter crumpled in my hand. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm. A judge's seal. Judicial review. For a standard birth certificate, I sat in my car and dialed the number for Senate Ledger Works. Howard Sennett had been my father's accountant for 30 years. He was a man who wore suspenders and smelled of peppermint and expensive bourbon. He had done my taxes when I was in college. He knew where the bodies were buried because he had likely deducted the shovel. "Lila," his receptionist chirped. "How are you?" "Honey?" "I am fine. Brenda." I said, "I need to see Howard. Today." "Oh, he is swamped." She said, "Tax season prep. You know. Tell him it is about the Parker account." I said, "Tell him it is urgent." She put me on hold. 5 minutes passed. When she came back, her voice was different, tighter. "He can squeeze you in for 10 minutes at 2 o'clock, she said. "But he has a hard stop. I will be there." Howard's office was a shrine to mahogany and silence. He did not stand up when I entered. He sat behind his massive desk, looking smaller than I remembered. His skin was gray, blending in with his suit. "Lila." He said, "Happy birthday for yesterday. Your dad told me." "Thank you." "Howard." I said. I sat down without being asked. He shuffled a file on his desk. He did not look me in the eye. "So," he said, "what can I do for you?" "Brenda said it was urgent. I want to see the returns." I said. Howard froze. "Which returns?" "My parents' returns," I said, "specifically from 1993. And then I want to see the filings from 2009 through 2013. Howard let out a short, dry laugh. "Lila, you know I cannot do that. Client confidentiality. You are an adult. You are not on their return anymore." "I know." I said, "but I was on their return in 1993. And I was listed as a dependent during the college years. I have a right to see the information that pertains to me." Howard took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked exhausted. "Why?" he asked. "Why now?" "Because Marlene made a joke last night." I said, "She said they adopted me for tax benefits." Howard winced. It was a small twitch of his eye. But I caught it. "That is just Marlene being colorful." He said, "Is it?" I asked. I leaned forward. "I went to the records office today." "Howard, my file is locked. Not just the adoption file, the birth certificate, everything. And now I am sitting here looking at you. And you are sweating. I am not sweating." He snapped. "You are—" I said, "You are terrified." Howard stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. "I cannot show you the returns," he said, his voice flat. "But I will tell you this. The 1993 filing was standard. The adoption credit was taken. It was legal. And 2009? I asked. "Why that specific window?" He turned back to me. His face was hard. "I am not discussing 2009. He said, "Or 10, or 13. That period is complex." "Complex how?" "Financially complex," he said. "Look, Lila, your father is a good man. He made choices to keep the roof over your head, to keep you in that fancy school, to pay for your life. Do not go digging for dirt where there is only survival." "Survival?" I asked. "We lived in a 6-bedroom house in the Heights. We went to Europe every summer." Howard looked at me with a pity that made my stomach turn. "Appearances, Lila," he said. "It costs a lot to maintain appearances. Now, I have another meeting. You need to go." He ushered me out before I could ask another question. As the door clicked shut behind me, I realized he hadn't denied anything. He had just reframed it. Survival. I drove straight to Naomi's house. She was already waiting on her front porch with a bottle of wine and a legal pad. "Okay," she said as I walked up the steps. I made a timeline. She led me into her kitchen and slapped the pad on the counter. She had drawn a long horizontal line with hash marks for years. "Here is 1993, she said, pointing to the far left. "Adoption finalized. Tax credit claimed. Boom." She moved her finger to the middle of the page. "Here is 2009. She said, "You were 16, a junior in high school." I nodded. I remembered 16. It was the year I got my braces off. The year I started looking at colleges. "What else happened that year?" Naomi asked. I thought about it. Dad switched jobs. I said, "He left the architecture firm and started his own consultancy. He said he wanted more freedom." "Right," Naomi said. "And what happened to the house?" "We renovated." I said, "The kitchen, the pool?" "Okay," Naomi said. "So, Dad quits his steady job to start a risky consultancy during a recession and immediately spends $100,000 on a renovation. Does that make sense to you?" "No," I said slowly. "It does not. And then there is this," Naomi said. She circled a date in red marker. 2010, your senior year. "You got the Briar Glen Community Leadership Scholarship." I nodded. "It was $5,000 a semester. It paid for my books and housing at the university. I looked up the bylaws of that scholarship this morning." Naomi said. She pulled up a screenshot on her phone. "Eligibility. Students demonstrating financial need and community impact within the designated revitalization zones." I stared at the screen. "Revitalization zones?" I asked. That means low-income neighborhoods. Lila, Naomi said, you lived in the Heights. Your dad drove a Lexus. You were not eligible for a need-based scholarship. But I got it. I said, I wrote an essay. Marlene was so proud. She framed the award letter. Naomi looked at me gently. Did you ever actually see the check? She asked. Did the money go to you? No, I said. It went directly to the university. Naomi tapped the paper. 2009 to 2013. The exact years Howard wouldn't talk about. The years you were in college. The years the Parkers were supposedly struggling for survival while renovating their kitchen. I felt a cold realization settling in my gut. I was not just a tax write-off in 1993, I whispered. I was a revenue stream in 2010. I needed to see someone who would crack. Howard was a stone wall. My father was a panicked animal. Marlene was a shark. I drove to Aunt Celeste's house. Marlene's sister lived in a condo on the other side of town. It was beige and quiet, and smelled of potpourri. Celeste opened the door, looking surprised. She was wearing a tracksuit and holding a watering can. Lila, she said, is everything okay? Marlene said you were taking some space. I am. I said, can I come in? We sat in her living room. I declined the tea she offered. I wanted to see her hands. They were twisting together in her lap. Aunt Celeste, I said, I need you to tell me the truth. About what? She asked, her eyes darting to the door. About the adoption, I said. About the money, she flinched, literally flinched, as if I had raised a hand. Lila, honey, do not do this, she whispered. It is the past. It is buried. It is not buried. I said, it is my life. Marlene told the entire restaurant I was a tax benefit. Was she lying? Celeste looked down at her hands. She was crying silently. She puts things crudely, Celeste said. She always has. But she loves you. In her way. I do not care about love right now. I said, I care about facts. Why did the adoption happen so fast? Why is there no agency? Celeste took a shuddering breath. We were told not to ask. She said, who told you? Marlene? And Grant? They came to us one weekend. They said they were getting a baby. They said it was a private arrangement. They seemed desperate. Desperate for a child? I asked. Celeste hesitated. Then she looked at me, her eyes full of a terrible, weak honesty. Desperate for a fix. She said, things were bad, Lila, with the business, with the marriage. They were drowning, and then suddenly, they had you, and everything stabilized. She reached out and touched my knee. Marlene called you their clean slate. Celeste whispered. She said, this baby is our clean slate. I thought she meant spiritually, but she trailed off. But you knew she meant financially. I finished. Celeste pulled her hand back. I did not know anything for sure. I just knew that after you arrived, the creditors stopped calling. The panic stopped. You brought peace. Lila, you saved them. I stood up. I felt sick. I was not a daughter. I said, I was an asset. Lila, please, Celeste begged. Do not tell her I talked to you. She will destroy me. I looked at my aunt. She was terrified of her own sister. I won't tell her. I said, I walked out of the condo. The sky was gray now, heavy with rain. I sat in my car and gripped the steering wheel. I realized then that I was not crying. I was not grieving the fact that I was adopted. I had known many adopted people. Their stories were often beautiful, woven with love and choice. I was grieving my own humanity. I thought about the waiter at the restaurant, the way he had looked at me when Marlene made her joke. He hadn't seen a daughter being teased. He had seen a commodity being appraised. She wouldn't have had anything without us. The humiliation burned through me, hot and radioactive. It was not just that they had used me. It was that they expected me to be grateful for the privilege of being used. I went to my parents' house when I knew they would be out. Tuesday night was their bridge club at the country club. They would be gone until 10. I still had a key. It felt heavy in my pocket. The house was silent. It smelled of lemon polish and lies. I walked past the formal living room, past the dining room where we had eaten so many staged holiday meals, and went straight to my father's study. Grant Parker was a digital hoarder. He never deleted anything. He kept backups of backups on external hard drives, lined up on his bookshelf like encyclopedias. I knew his password. Parker 1993. The year they got their clean slate, I booted up his desktop. It hummed to life. I plugged in the oldest external drive I could find, one labeled Backup 2008 to 2012. I opened the file directory. It was a mess of folders, taxes, house, recipes. I used the search bar. I typed compliance. Nothing. I typed placement. A folder appeared. Foundation/placement docs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I double-clicked. It was an archive of emails, Outlook files saved as PDFs. I opened the first one, dated October 14th, 2009. From Marlene to Grant. Subject: Compliance check. Grant. Howard says we need to show proof of placement for the renewal. Did you file the update with the fund? We cannot lose the Tier 1 status next year. The tuition is due. Tier 1 status. Tuition. I opened another. Dated January 2010. From Grant to Howard Senate. Subject: Scholarship. Disbursement. Howard. The funds from the Youth Futures connection cleared. Should we route it directly to the university or through the LLC first? I want to make sure the paper trail matches the application. There it was. Youth Futures. I searched for that phrase. Briar Glen Youth Futures Fund. Dozens of emails popped up. Most were boring. Invitations to galas, newsletters, but some were marked with high importance. One email caught my eye. It was from a sender I did not recognize. Admin BGYFF .org . Subject: Do not forward. Beneficiary update. Dear Mr. Parker, per our private agreement, the beneficiary profile for LRP has been updated for the 2011 fiscal year. Please ensure she attends the mandatory photo session next week. We need fresh visuals for the donor packet. I stared at the screen. Beneficiary profile. Fresh visuals. I remembered that photo session. Marlene had told me we were getting family portraits done. She had bought me a plain blue dress. She had told me to smile, to look hopeful. Those photos weren't for our mantelpiece. They were marketing materials. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and copied the entire folder. I was just ejecting the drive when the front door opened. I froze. They were home early. Lila? My father's voice drifted down the hall. Is that your car outside? I stood up. I slipped the flash drive into my bra. Against my skin. Dad, I called out. I am in the study. Grant appeared in the doorway. He looked tired. His tie loosened. When he saw me standing by his computer, the color drained from his face. What are you doing? He asked. His voice was breathless. I was looking for a charger. I lied. My phone died. He looked at the computer screen. I had closed the windows, but the external hard drive was still sitting on the desk. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. You were not looking for a charger, he said. No, I said. I was looking for the truth. Grant closed his eyes. He leaned against the door frame as if his legs had given out. What did you find? He whispered. Enough, I said. I found the emails. Dad, the Youth Futures Fund, the scholarship that was routed through an LLC, the beneficiary profile. I walked toward him. You sold pictures of me. I said, you sold my story to get a scholarship I did not qualify for. Grant shook his head violently. It was not like that. He said, It was a program, a support program. It was fraud. I said, Lila, stop, he shouted. The sudden volume made me jump. Grant Parker never shouted. You do not understand the pressure we were under, he cried. The market crashed. We lost half our savings overnight. The business was bleeding. We were going to lose the house. We were going to lose everything. So you used me to plug the holes? I asked. We protected you, he insisted. We kept your life stable. You went to the best schools. You never wanted for anything. Yes. We utilized some programs. Yes. We leveraged our situation. But it was for you. For me? I laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. It was for the house, Dad. It was for the country club fees. It was so Marlene didn't have to be embarrassed in front of her friends. You are digging for a reason to hate your mother, he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. That is what this is. You have always been jealous of her. I stared at him. The deflection was so clumsy it was almost tragic. I do not hate her. I said, I pity her, and I pity you. I moved to push past him. He grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. Lila, please, he said. His anger dissolved into panic in a split second. Tears welled in his eyes. Please stop. For your own sake. If you keep pulling at this, it is not just us who will get hurt. There are other people involved. Powerful people. Let go of me, I said. He held on for a second longer, searching my face for some sign of the daughter who used to bring him coffee in bed on Father's Day. He didn't find her. He let go. I walked out of the house. I did not look back. The next day, I went to work. I needed the normalcy of my office at Alder Strategies. I needed spreadsheets that balanced and clients who told me exactly what they wanted. Alder was a mid-sized consulting firm. We handled crisis management, strategic pivoting, and compliance for organizations that had lost their way. I sat at my desk, the flash drive burning a hole in my purse. I tried to focus on a slide deck for a pharmaceutical client. Lila, my boss, Karen, stopped by my cubicle. She dropped a thick manila folder on my desk. New assignment, she said. One of the partners specifically requested you for the support team. It is a legacy cleanup. Cleanup? I asked. Old files, Karen said. Dead entities. We are auditing a holding company that is liquidating its assets. They need someone with an eye for detail to cross-reference their philanthropic history. I opened the folder. The first page was a summary of the client's portfolio. Client: Northwind Holdings. Subsidiary entities: dissolved. Lake Harrow Properties, LLC. Briar Glen Youth Futures Fund. My blood went cold. The room seemed to tilt. Briar Glen Youth Futures Fund. It was here, in my office, on my desk. I looked up at Karen. She was checking her watch. Oblivious. Is there a problem? She asked. No, I said. My voice sounded distant. No problem. Good. Have a preliminary report by Friday. She walked away. I looked down at the file. Lake Harrow Properties, LLC, Lake Harrow. A memory surfaced. I was 8 years old, a summer house, a dock with splintered wood, the smell of algae and sunscreen. We had gone there for 3 summers in a row. Marlene had called it the cottage. Then, suddenly, we stopped going. When I asked why, she said the owners had sold it. I had assumed the owners were friends. But here it was, listed as a subsidiary of the same holding company that ran the Youth Futures Fund. The Parkers didn't have friends with a lake house. They had a corporate perk. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I scanned the documents in the file, looking for names. I saw redactions. I saw black bars over signatures. I left work late. The office was empty. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the hallway. When I got to my apartment, I checked my mailbox in the lobby. There was a single plain white envelope, no stamp, no return address. It had been hand-delivered. I carried it upstairs. My hands were shaking. I sat on my sofa and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy. It was a page from a legal agreement. Clause 14. Placement of the minor child, Subject A, is executed under private agreement between the Parker estate and the founding partners. All financial considerations shall be classified as charitable support to ensure anonymity. Someone had taken a yellow highlighter and marked the line, placement executed under private agreement. I turned the paper over. Handwritten on the back in blue ink were 5 words. Ask Marlene about the lake house. I looked at the handwriting. It was elegant, slanted, and completely unfamiliar. I was not just investigating the past anymore. The past was investigating me. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. A black sedan was parked across from my building. As I watched, its lights turned on, and it pulled away, disappearing into the Briar Glen night. I held the paper against my chest. Ask Marlene about the lake house. I absolutely would. The drive to my parents' house the next morning felt like commuting to a demolition site. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain, which seemed appropriate for a Thursday in late January. I had the photocopied page in my purse, folded once, sharp against my hip. Ask Marlene about the lake house. I found my mother in her element. The sunroom. It was a pristine, climate-controlled bubble of white wicker and thriving orchids. Marlene was repotting a fern, her hands protected by gardening gloves that looked cleaner than most people's dinner napkins. She didn't look up when I walked in. "You are early," she said. "I thought you were coming for lunch." "I'm not staying for lunch," I said. Marlene stopped packing soil. She dusted her gloved hands together with a soft shh, shh sound. She turned to me, her face composed in that eerie, serene mask she wore when she sensed trouble. "Is this about your father?" she asked. "He told me you came by yesterday, rummaging through his office like a burglar." "Honestly, Lila, you are 33 years old. If you need money, just ask. You do not need to steal his backup drives. I am not here for money," I said. I pulled the envelope from my bag. "I am here for the truth." Marlene laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, like ice hitting glass. "The truth," she repeated. "You sound like a bad soap opera." "What truth?" "Darling, that we loved you? That we gave you a life most people would kill for?" I held up the paper. "I want to know about the lake house," I said. The smile vanished. It didn't fade. It was deleted. Her eyes went flat. "The lake house?" she said. "We haven't been there in 20 years. Why on earth would you bring that up?" "Because I know who owned it." I said, "It wasn't a friend. Was it, Mom?" "It was a holding company. Lake Harrow Properties, LLC. The same company connected to the Youth Futures Fund." Marlene turned back to her fern. She picked up a small trowel and stabbed it into the dirt. "You are being ridiculous," she said. "It was a rental. We rented it through a service. Your father handled it." "No," I said. I stepped closer. "You didn't rent it. You were assigned it. Just like you were assigned the scholarship money. Just like you were assigned me." Marlene spun around. She ripped the gloves off her hands and threw them onto the potting bench. "Stop it!" she snapped. Her voice was shrill, cracking the calm atmosphere of the room. "You are hysterical. You come in here, accusing us of what? Of utilizing resources? Of being smart? I am accusing you of treating me like a transaction," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "You joked about tax benefits. But it wasn't a joke. It was the business model." Marlene stared at me. Her chest was heaving. Then, suddenly, her face crumpled. Tears spilled over her lashes, instant and plentiful. "How can you be so cruel?" she sobbed. She pressed a hand to her chest. "After everything I have done, the dance lessons, the tutors, the nights I stayed up when you were sick. Do you think a tax write-off gets homemade soup? Do you think a transaction gets a mother who worries herself sick?" I watched her cry. It was a masterful performance. 10 years ago, I would have been on my knees, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. Today, I felt nothing. "I'm not talking about soup. Mom," I said quietly, "I am talking about the fact that my adoption papers have no agency letterhead. I'm talking about a $15,000 placement fee paid to a facilitator." Marlene wiped her eyes. The tears stopped as quickly as they had started. She looked at me with cold, hard clarity. "You are so dramatic," she spat. "You always have been. You get an idea in your head, and you twist everything to fit it. You want to be a victim. Lila, it is pathetic. You have a good life. You have a career. You have status. And you have it because we knew how to navigate the world." She stepped closer, invading my space. Go ahead, she hissed. Dig, ruin your own peace of mind. But do not expect me to hold your hand while you do it. The lake house was a perk of doing business with people who actually get things done in this town. If you cannot handle that, then maybe you really do not belong in this family. The words hung in the air. Maybe you really do not belong. It was the invitation to leave I had been waiting for. I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, with a click that sounded like a lock snapping shut. I drove north. I needed to see the lake house. Lake Harrow was an hour away, a small, affluent community built around a deep, cold body of water. I hadn't been there since I was 12. I remembered the house as a sprawling, cedar-shingled mansion with a wraparound porch. I remembered my father pacing on that porch, talking on a brick-sized cell phone. I remembered my mother sunbathing on the dock, wearing oversized sunglasses, never actually getting in the water. I remembered the tension. The way they would snap at each other if the phone rang. The way we left abruptly one August morning, leaving half our groceries in the fridge. I found the address in my phone's GPS, 14 Pines Lane. When I pulled up, the house was gone. The lot was empty. A chain-link fence surrounded a pit of overgrown weeds and a foundation slab that looked like a scar in the earth. A rusted sign hung on the gate. Property seized. County reclamation. I got out of the car. The wind off the lake was biting. I walked to the fence. Why was it demolished? Lakefront property was gold. I drove to the Lake Harrow Town Hall. It was a small building that smelled of pine sol. I went to the clerk's desk. I am looking for information on 14 Pines Lane. I said. The clerk, a young man with acne scars, typed it in. Demolished in 2011. He said, following the settlement. What settlement? I asked. He squinted at the screen. Civil suit, environmental hazard and zoning violations. The owner, Lake Harrow Properties, LLC, dissolved right after. The county took the land for back taxes. Who was the contact for the LLC? I asked. He clicked a tab. Usually, I cannot give out owner info, but since the entity is dead here, managing contact, Grant Parker. I stared at the screen. My father. He wasn't just renting. He was the managing contact. He was the fall guy. Thank you. I said. I walked back to my car. My phone buzzed. It was Naomi. I found a lawyer. She said, Devin Hart. He specializes in family law and non-traditional adoptions. He can see us at 4. I will be there. I said. Devin Hart's office was in a converted loft in downtown Briar Glen. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and a desk cluttered with legal pads. He looked at the photocopied page I had received in the envelope. He frowned. Where did you get this? He asked. It was mailed to me anonymously. I said. Devin leaned back. He tapped the paper. This isn't standard adoption language, he said. Placement executed under private agreement. That phrase. It is contract law, not family law. It treats the child, you, more like an asset transfer than a custody arrangement. Is it legal? Naomi asked. Technically? Maybe. In the 90s, private adoptions were the Wild West. If you had a lawyer who knew how to write a waiver, you could bypass a lot of agency oversight. But this clause about charitable support, that is the red flag. Why? I asked. Because it suggests the money wasn't for the adoption fees. Devin said, it suggests the money was moving through a charity to hide the payment. It looks like laundering. Lila, disguised as philanthropy. He looked at me. Whoever drafted this was trying to insulate the adoptive parents from direct liability. They were making sure that if anyone looked at the bank transfers, they would see a donation to a nonprofit, not a check for a baby. My stomach turned. The Youth Futures Fund, I whispered. Devin nodded. If that fund was the intermediary, then your adoption was essentially a charitable project, a tax-exempt event. He handed the paper back to me. Be careful. Lila, he said, if this agreement exists, there is a master file somewhere, and people who write contracts like this usually have insurance policies, meaning They have leverage on everyone involved. I spent the next 3 hours at the Briar Glen Public Library. I needed to know everything about the Briar Glen Youth Futures Fund. It had been a local darling. I found articles from the early 2000s in the microfiche archives. Youth Futures Fund raises record millions for at-risk youth. Gala of the Year. Briar Glen Elite. Turnout for Futures. I scanned the photos. There was my mother, Marlene, in a glittering black gown, holding a champagne flute. She was standing next to the mayor and a man I didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The caption read, Marlene Parker with Fund Director Thomas Vane. Thomas Vane. I wrote the name down. I kept scrolling. The article stopped abruptly in 2013. Youth Futures Fund suspends operations amidst restructuring. Then nothing, no follow-up, no investigation, just silence. I searched for donor newsletters. The library had a few archived in a dusty binder. I flipped through them. Fall 2005, Spring 2006. I turned to Winter 2008. There, on page 4, was a section titled Success Stories, and there was my name, Lila P. There was no photo of me, but the text was unmistakable. Lila P., age 16, has thrived thanks to the stability provided by our Guardian Placement Initiative. A straight-A student and community volunteer, Lila represents the bright future our donors are building. I stared at the page. Guardian Placement Initiative. I had never heard of it. I had never attended a meeting. I had never met a counselor. But according to this newsletter, I was their poster child. I was the proof that their money was working. My entire adolescence, my grades, my piano recitals, my existence, had been harvested for copy in a fundraising brochure. I felt a wave of nausea. It was invasive. It was theft. I looked at the date again. Winter 2008. That was right before the renovation, right before the scholarship. I needed to talk to someone who had been there, not a donor, a witness. I searched for the reporter who wrote the suspension article, Sandra Voss. She had a blog now, Briar Glen Watchdog. It hadn't been updated in 6 months. I found an email address. I sent a message. Subject, Youth Futures Fund / Lila Parker. I am the Lila P. From the 2008 newsletter. I need to know what happened. She replied in 10 minutes. Meet me at the diner on 4th. Come alone. Sandra Voss was a woman made of sharp angles and cigarette smoke. She sat in a booth at the back of the diner, nursing a black coffee. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too many city council meetings go sideways. You are real, she said. I am real. I said, I sat down. Why wouldn't I be? Because half the kids in those newsletters weren't. She said, she took a sip of coffee. Thomas Vane invented them. He used stock photos. He made up names. Little Timmy from the block. It was all fiction. But I am not fiction. I said, no, Sandra said. You were the premium package, the Guardian placement. What does that mean? Sandra leaned in. It means you were placed with a family specifically to give the fund credibility. The Parkers were prominent. Marlene was social. If they adopted a child through the fund's private channel, it validated the whole operation. It made it look like high society charity, not just a tax shelter. She looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and respect. You were the anchor tenant. Honey, you were the loss leader that brought in the big donors. I felt cold. Anchor tenant. Why did it shut down? I asked. Sandra sighed. Someone tried to talk. A whistleblower. An accountant inside the fund. He reached out to me in 2013. Said he had proof that the scholarship money was being looped back to the donors through shell companies. Like a rebate. A rebate. I repeated. Exactly. You donate $10,000. You get a tax deduction. The fund gives $5,000 back to you as a scholarship or consulting fee for your shell company. You look like a hero. You pay less tax. And you keep half your money. And the whistleblower? He got scared. Sandra said. He called me one night. Terrified. Said he was being followed. Said they threatened his family. Then the fund announced it was restructuring. And the story died. The editor killed my piece. Said we didn't have enough evidence and he didn't want to get sued by the power players in town. Who were the power players? Sandra smiled grimly. Everyone, Lila, the bank, the mayor, and yes, your parents. Or at least, your parents' debt. They were leveraged up to their eyeballs. The fund owned them. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital recorder. I kept this, she said. It is the only interview the whistleblower gave me before he went dark. It is not admissible in court, but it is the truth. She slid it across the table. Listen to it, but be careful. These people didn't just disappear money. They disappeared problems. I sat in my car in the diner parking lot. It was raining now. Hard sheets of water hitting the roof. I held the recorder. I didn't play it yet. I wasn't ready. I drove home. The city lights smeared on my windshield. I felt a strange sensation. Anger. Yes, but something else. Clarity. For my whole life, I had felt a subtle, nagging debt. A sense that I owed the Parkers for saving me. That I had to be perfect to justify my presence in their beautiful house. Now I knew. I didn't owe them anything. They hadn't saved me. They had leased me. I wasn't a charity case. I was a shield. I parked my car. As I walked to my building, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the dumpster. I flinched, gripping my keys as a weapon. Lila. It was my father. He was wearing a trench coat, soaking wet. He looked like a ghost of the man who used to grill steaks on Sundays. Dad? I said. Get in the car. He said. Not yours. Mine. I hesitated. Please, he said. Just for 5 minutes. I cannot be seen standing here. I got into his car. It smelled of wet wool and fear. Grant didn't look at me. He stared out the windshield at the rain. I know you went to the lake house, he said, or where it used to be. I know about the LLC. Dad, I said, I know about the settlement. I know you were the managing contact. Grant nodded slowly. I didn't have a choice. Lila, he said. You always have a choice. I said. No, he whispered. Not then. Not in 2009. The market. It destroyed us. We were insolvent. The bank was going to foreclose on the house. Marlene. She couldn't handle the shame. She said she would leave me. She said she would take you and go. So you made a deal with the fund? I asked. Thomas Vane came to me. Grant said he knew we were in trouble. He knew we had adopted you through the private channel years ago. He said he could help. He said if I managed a few properties for the fund, if I let them use our name, use your story, he would clear the debt. And the scholarship? I asked. Part of the package. Grant said, it was money to keep us afloat, to pay your tuition, to keep the lights on. I looked at him. This man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had checked under my bed for monsters. He was the monster, not a scary one, a weak one, which was almost worse. Did you know? I asked. When you adopted me. Did you know then? Grant closed his eyes. We wanted a baby, he said. We really did. But the agency wait lists were years long and expensive, vain. He was just starting the fund then. He said he could expedite it. He said he could make it mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial. I opened the car door. The rain was freezing. Who proposed it? I asked. The tax benefit? The write-off? Who said it first? Grant didn't answer for a long time. Then he whispered, Marlene. I nodded. Of course. I stepped out into the rain. Lila, Grant called after me. Be careful. Vane is gone. But the people behind him, they are still here. The settlement came with strings. What kind of strings? I asked, leaning back in. Silence. He said, absolute silence. If you break it, the immunity deal is void. They will come for everything. Let them come, I said. I went upstairs. I was shivering. I made tea, but didn't drink it. I sat at my kitchen table and played the recording from Sandra. It was scratchy, a man's voice, nervous, fast. It is a shell game. The Youth Futures Fund isn't about kids. It is about real estate. They buy blighted properties, get the tax credits, then transfer the assets to the LLCs. The donors get the write-offs. The kids are just props. We have files on them. Placement agreements. We own their stories. I stopped the tape. I looked at the folder Karen had given me at work. The legacy cleanup. I opened it to the back page. There was a list of court reference numbers for the dissolved entities. Case ref 2011-CV-09882. Sealed. I typed the number into my firm's internal database. As an employee of Alder Row, I had clearance to view case headers for active files. The screen loaded. Project. Northwind/Parker Review. Status. Active. Assigned. Parker. Support. I stared at the screen. My firm wasn't just cleaning up old files. They were cleaning up my file. And someone had assigned it to me. Was it a test? A threat? Or a mistake? I looked at the header again. Cross-reference entity. Vane Trust. Thomas Vane. The web wasn't just local. It was institutional, and I was standing right in the center of it, holding a flashlight. I picked up my phone. I texted Naomi. I need Devon Hart to file a petition. I want to unseal case 2011-CV-09882. Naomi replied instantly. Are you sure? That is the nuclear option. I looked at the rain lashing against the window. I thought about Marlene's ferns. I thought about Grant's fear. I thought about the 33 years I had spent trying to be good enough. I typed back. Push the button. The file on my desk at Alder Row Strategies was 2 inches thick and smelled of dust and laser printer toner. It was labeled Northwind Holdings, Legacy Compliance Review. To anyone else in the firm, it was just another cleanup job. A dead company needing its bones buried properly so the assets could be liquidated. To me, it was an autopsy of my own life. I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the cover sheet. My boss, Karen, had assigned me to the support team because I was good at details. I was the person who found the missing zero in the spreadsheet, the one who noticed when the dates on an invoice did not align with the shipping manifest. She did not know that the entity listed as a subsidiary, the Briar Glen Youth Futures Fund, was the reason I had braces, a college degree, and a mother who looked at me like a depreciating asset. I had a choice. I could recuse myself. I could walk into Karen's office, cite a conflict of interest, and hand the file back. It was the ethical thing to do. It was the safe thing to do. But safety had gotten me nowhere. Safety had kept me quiet for 33 years while my family sold shares in my existence. I opened my laptop and pulled up the firm's conflict disclosure form. I typed out a memo, carefully worded. I have a familial connection to a former board member of the Youth Futures Fund. I will restrict my review to financial compliance and historical data. I will not make strategic decisions regarding liability. I sent a copy to Naomi. I am staying on the case. I texted her. I am going to read every single line. Naomi replied instantly. Document everything. If they catch you digging for personal reasons, they will fire you. Keep it professional. I put my phone away and opened the file. For the next 3 days, I lived inside the numbers. I arrived at the office at 7 in the morning and left at 8 at night. I built spreadsheets that mapped the flow of money from the fund to the various LLCs. It was not subtle. It was clumsy. Arrogant fraud. The fund had raised millions between 2009 and 2013. The donor list read like a who is who of Briar Glen society. Developers, bankers, local politicians. On the surface, the money went to youth empowerment programs. But when I drilled down into the vendor payments, the empowerment evaporated. There were invoices for venue rental paid to Lake Harrow Properties, LLC, $50,000 for a weekend retreat. I cross-referenced the dates. The retreat was listed as taking place in February. I remembered the lake house in February. It was boarded up. The pipes were drained. There was no heat. No one had stayed there. There were payments to Vane Associates for curriculum development, $100,000 a year. There was no curriculum in the file, no textbooks, no pamphlets. Then I found the scholarship pipeline, on paper. The fund gave out dozens of scholarships a year. But the checks were not written to universities. They were written to Educational Consultants Incorporated, another shell company that dissolved in 2014. The money went in a circle. The donors gave to the fund, took the tax deduction, and then the fund paid the shell companies for services that never happened. The shell companies, I suspected, quietly returned a portion of the cash to the original donors, minus a handling fee for Thomas Vane and his associates. It was a wash cycle. And I was the detergent. I turned the page to the section labeled Beneficiary Impact. This was the marketing material, the brochures, the annual reports. I saw faces of teenagers, smiling, hopeful, diverse, Marcus T., aspiring engineer, Sarah J., future nurse. I flipped back to the 2010 report. There was Marcus T. again. Same photo, same smile. But this time his name was Tyrone M., and he was an aspiring architect. I checked 2011. He was David L. They were stock photos. I ran a reverse image search on my phone. Marcus was a model from a generic corporate image library. Sarah was from a dental hygiene ad. They were all fake. The success stories, the heartwarming testimonials, the lives changed. It was all cut-and-paste fiction designed to give the tax shelter a human face, except for one. I turned to the 2012 report. There, on page 6, was a candid shot of a girl playing the piano. She was wearing a blue dress. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked focused, serious. It was me. The caption read, "Lila P. continues to excel in her conservatory studies, proving that consistent support yields brilliance." I did not go to a conservatory. I took piano lessons at the mall. My stomach dropped. I sat back in my chair, the air in the office feeling suddenly thin. I was the only real thing in the brochure. Why? Because a fake child cannot show up at a gala. A stock photo cannot shake hands with the mayor. They needed a physical prop. They needed someone who could walk into a room and make the lie breathe. I wasn't just a tax benefit. I was the authenticity filter. My mother's social ambition, her need to show me off, had made me the perfect cover. Look at her. They would say, "She is real. The program works." I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to close my eyes. I had spent my life thinking I was special to them. In reality, I was just the highest quality inventory. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from my family group chat. Aunt Celeste left the group. Uncle Roy left the group. I frowned. I opened the chat. The last message was from me, sent 2 days ago. A picture of my cat. Trying to keep things normal. No one had liked it. No one had replied. I opened Instagram. I went to my cousin Sophie's page. She was having a baby shower next weekend. I had already bought a gift. I scrolled through her stories. There was a video from yesterday, a brunch. My mother was there, holding court at the head of the table. Aunt Celeste was there. Sophie was there. I hadn't been invited. I went to my mother's Facebook page. She had posted a status update that morning, heartbroken to see someone you love struggle with mental health. It is so hard when they push family away and invent problems to justify their unhappiness. Prayers for my daughter. We are here when she is ready to come back to reality. There were 50 comments. So sorry. Marlene, stay strong. Mama, mental illness is so tough. She was getting ahead of the story. She was painting me as unstable. If I started talking about shell companies and fake scholarships, everyone in Briar Glen would nod sadly and say, "Poor Lila." Marlene said she was off her meds. She was isolating me. She was cutting the lines of communication so that, when I finally screamed, no one would listen. I put the phone down. My hand was shaking. "Two can play at this game." "Mom," I whispered, "you have the social network, but I have the receipts." I needed a witness who wasn't on the payroll. Sandra Voss had mentioned a name, Elise Moreland, a former administrator for the fund. I found her on LinkedIn. She was working as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic in the next town over. I took an early lunch break. I drove to the clinic and waited in the parking lot. At noon, a woman in scrubs walked out. She looked tired. She sat on a bench and lit a cigarette with hands that trembled slightly. I got out of my car and walked over. "Elise?" I asked. She looked up. Her eyes widened. She recognized me. I had that effect on people who had seen the brochures. "Lila Parker," she said. She exhaled a plume of smoke. "I wondered if you would ever show up. You know who I am." I said. I typed your name into the annual reports for 5 years. She said. I cropped your photos. I wrote the captions about your conservatory studies. I sat down on the bench next to her. She didn't move away, but she tensed. I need to know. I said, how much did my mother know? Elise laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. Your mother? Honey, your mother was the MVP, most valuable player. Was she the mastermind? No, Elise said. Thomas Vane was the mastermind. He was the one moving the money. But your mother, she was the face. Vane had the cash, but he had the personality of a wet cardboard box. He needed someone who could sell the vision, someone who could cry on cue at the fundraisers, someone who could bring a daughter to the stage and make the donors weep. So she knew it was a scam? She knew it was a performance, Elise said. She knew the numbers didn't add up. She knew the scholarships were kickbacks. But she didn't care. She loved the applause. She loved being the saint of Briar Glen. And my adoption? I asked. The private placement? Elise stubbed out her cigarette on the concrete. That was the pilot program, she said. Vane used to call it branding. He said if he could get a prominent family to adopt through the fund, it would legitimize the private placement fees. He waived the usual costs for your parents, gave them a stipend for expenses, and in return, they gave him a poster child, a stipend. I repeated, monthly. Elise said, until you turned 18, listed as foster support in the internal ledger, but it went straight to your dad's LLC. I felt the blood drain from my face. They were paid to keep me, like a foster placement, but without the state oversight, without the social workers checking to see if I was happy. Did they love me? I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. It was the child in me speaking, the little girl in the blue dress. Elise looked at me. Her expression softened. Just a fraction. I do not know. Lila, she said, I think they liked the idea of you. You completed the set. But love? Real love doesn't come with a monthly invoice. She stood up. I have to go back in, she said. Leave me out of this. I have a quiet life now. I do not want Vane's ghost coming after me. She walked back into the clinic. I drove straight to my mother's house. I didn't call. I didn't text. I used my key, knowing she probably hadn't changed the locks yet. She wouldn't want the neighbors to see a locksmith van. It would raise questions. She was in the kitchen, arranging flowers, always with the flowers. Lila, she said, not turning around. I saw your car. I assume you are here to apologize for the scene you caused with your father. I stood in the doorway. I know about the stipend. Mom, Marlene froze. She set down a hydrangea. I know about the monthly payments. I continued. I know I was the pilot program. I know you used me to sell the fund to your friends. She turned slowly. Her face was composed, but her eyes were dangerous. You are listening to garbage, she said. People love to tear down successful families. It is jealousy. Elise Moreland isn't jealous, I said. She is tired. And so am I. I walked into the room. I stood on the other side of the granite island, the barrier between us. I have one question, I said, and if you lie to me, I will go to the IRS tomorrow. I will hand them the files I have. I will burn this whole house down. Marlene's nostrils flared. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said. She stared at me. She saw something in my face, maybe the ghost of the calm, efficient daughter she had raised, and she realized I was not bluffing. Ask your question, she said. Did you ever love me? I asked. Not as a prop, not as a tax break, not as a clean slate. Did you love me? The silence stretched. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked in the hallway. Marlene looked at me. She didn't cry this time. She didn't soften. She straightened her spine, pulling herself up to her full height. Love, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. You talk about love like it is a feeling, like it is some warm, fuzzy blanket. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the counter. Love is survival. Lila, love is doing what is necessary to keep the family standing. We gave you a name. We gave you a home. We gave you a future. We protected you from the gutter. That is not an answer, I said. It is the only answer that matters, she shouted. Her composure cracked. Love is what you earn, Lila. You earn it by being grateful. You earn it by not embarrassing your family. You earn it by playing your part. She was screaming now, her face red and contorted. I loved you when you were good. When you made us look good. When you were the perfect little girl in the blue dress. But this digging, this ungrateful, ugly investigation, this is not love. This is betrayal. I looked at her. I really looked at her. She was empty. There was nothing inside her but mirrors, reflecting her own image back at her. Thank you, I said quietly. What? She snapped. Thank you for finally being honest. I said, you didn't love me. You loved the performance. I turned to leave. Get out, she screamed after me. Get out, and do not come back until you are ready to beg. I walked out the front door. I didn't look back. My father was waiting by my car. He must have been in the garage. He looked smaller than ever, his shoulders hunched inside his cardigan. Lila, he said. I stopped. I didn't have the energy to fight him. I heard her, he said. His voice was trembling. She gets upset. She gets honest. Dad, I said. Grant looked at his shoes. I signed the papers. He whispered, I know. I said, I didn't understand half of them. He said, Vane brought them over. He used all these legal terms, asset protection, liability shields. I wanted the noise to stop. What noise? The noise of her being unhappy, he said. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a pathetic, watery honesty. You do not know what it was like before you came. She was miserable. She made the house feel like a prison. When Vane proposed the adoption, the deal, she lit up. She had a project. She had a purpose. So you bought me to keep her happy. I said, I wanted peace, Lila, he said. I just wanted peace. And she made me feel like if I asked questions, I was betraying her. She said we were a team, that teams stick together. He reached out a hand, but didn't touch me. I did love you, Lila, he said. I used to read to you, the one about the rabbit. You remember? I remembered. The Velveteen Rabbit. The story about a toy that becomes real only after it has been loved until its fur is worn off. It is a sad story, Dad. I said, the rabbit only becomes real when the boy gets sick and they have to burn all his toys. Grant flinched. I am sorry, he whispered. I got into my car. I watched him in the rearview mirror as I drove away. He stood in the driveway, a man who had sold his soul for a quiet life, and ended up with neither. That night, my phone rang. It wasn't a number I recognized. It was blocked. I let it go to voicemail. I sat on my couch, staring at the phone, waiting for the notification light to blink. It blinked. I dialed into my voicemail. You have one new message. I pressed play. There was a pause, static, then a voice. It was male, deep, distorted, as if speaking through a cloth or a modifier. You are looking at the wrong thing. Lila. Pause. You think you are the secret. You were never the secret. You were the distraction. The settlement was the secret. Click. The message ended. I sat frozen. The settlement was the secret. The settlement involving the lake house. The one that dissolved the LLC. The one my father was the managing contact for. I had assumed the settlement was just about money, about bad debt. But the voice said I was a distraction. Someone else was watching. Someone who knew the details. Someone who had my number. Was it the whistleblower? Or was it someone from the other side? The next morning, the mail arrived. There was a thick envelope from the Department of Vital Records. My request for the birth certificate file. I tore it open. There was no birth certificate. Instead, there was a single sheet of cream-colored paper with the state seal at the top. Notice of restricted access. Dear Ms. Parker, your request for access to File 9-3-4428 has been denied. This file contains third-party confidential material and was sealed by court order on March 14, 2011. The sealing order was granted upon the petition of an external party to protect sensitive proprietary information. I stared at the date, March 14, 2011. I was 18 years old in 2011, an adult, but the file hadn't been sealed by my parents. It had been sealed by an external party. And the reason wasn't privacy, it was proprietary information. Proprietary, that was a business term. You sealed trade secrets, you sealed formulas. You didn't seal a human being's birth records for being proprietary unless that human being was considered intellectual property. I looked at the bottom of the letter. You may petition for a review of this decision, subject to the approval of the original petitioner's legal counsel. Original petitioner, Northwind Holdings, Legal Division, Northwind, the client file on my desk at work. My employer didn't just own the cleanup, they owned the lock. I put the letter down. The voicemail echoed in my head. The settlement was the secret. In 2011, the Lake House LLC was dissolved, the settlement was signed, and my birth records were sealed by the holding company that owned the lake house. It was all one knot, and I was going to cut it. The signature on the legal petition was small. Just my name, Lila Parker, written in blue ink on a line that felt far too short to hold the weight of what I was doing. I slid the paper across the mahogany desk to Devin Hart. "Are you sure?" Devin asked. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing a watch that looked too expensive for a lawyer who worked out of a converted loft. "Once I file this, Northwind Holdings gets notified. They will know you are coming for the sealed file. They will know you are looking at the proprietary data." "I am sure," I said. Devin nodded. He placed the document in a folder. "Expect a response within 48 hours, he said. "They might try to bury you in paper. Or they might try to settle, if they offer you money. Lila, do not take it. Money is how they buy the silence. I do not want their money." I said, "I want my history." I left his office and walked 2 blocks to a brownstone building with a discreet brass plaque. Dr. Eris Thorne, Clinical Psychology. I had started therapy 3 days ago. I was not there because I felt broken, though my mother would have loved to frame it that way. I was there because I needed to be strategic. I had watched Marlene operate for 33 years. I knew her patterns. When she felt cornered, she lashed out. She became emotional, chaotic, a victim of her own narrative. I could not afford to be reactive. If I wanted to dismantle a lie that had stood for 3 decades, I had to be colder than the people who built it. I sat in the chair opposite Dr. Thorne. The room was beige and quiet. "How are you sleeping?" he asked. "I am not," I said, "but I am functioning." "And the anger?" "It is there," I said, "but it is useful. It is fuel. I just need to make sure it does not burn the wrong things." I spent the hour talking about boundaries. We did not talk about my childhood trauma or my feelings of abandonment. We talked about containment, how to hold a devastating truth without letting it shatter your composure. I practiced the conversation I would have with my parents. I rehearsed the tone, neutral, factual, unmoved. I left the session feeling not lighter, but denser, like I was adding layers of armor. That night, Naomi came over. She brought takeout and a laptop. We turned my dining room table into a war room. We had the timeline. We had the emails. We had the photocopied page. Now we needed the money trail. "I found the lawsuit," Naomi said, her mouth full of pad thai. She spun her laptop around. It was a court filing from 2010. Northwind Savings versus Lake Harrow Properties, LLC. I thought the LLC dissolved because of a settlement. I said, "It did," Naomi said. "But look at the initial complaint. Northwind sued the LLC for breach of contract and contractor fraud. Apparently, the LLC took out a massive construction loan to develop the lake house property into a retreat center." I leaned in. "A retreat center?" "Allegedly." Naomi said, "But the contractor they hired was a shell. The money vanished. The bank sued. So my father, the managing contact, was on the hook for millions." I said, "Yes," Naomi said, "but look at the resolution." She clicked a tab. "Dismissed with prejudice. Settlement reached." And then, Naomi said, "Look at this." She pulled up a property record for my parents' current house in Briar Glen. In 2011, 3 months after the settlement, the mortgage on your parents' house was modified. The principal was reduced by 60%. I stared at the screen. 60%. That was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Northwind Savings forgave the debt, I whispered. Exactly, Naomi said. They hold the mortgage. They sued the LLC. They settled. And then, magically, Grant and Marlene Parker get a massive write-down on their personal home loan. The tax benefits, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Marlene's joke at the dinner, she wasn't talking about the adoption tax credit. That is peanuts. She was talking about the debt forgiveness. They used the adoption to structure the settlement, I said, my voice rising. They traded me for the house. They agreed to let the Youth Futures Fund use my story, use my image, use the guardian placement narrative to legitimize their operations. And in exchange, the bank wiped their slate clean. It wasn't a rescue, Naomi said softly. It was a sale. I sat back, feeling the blood hum in my ears. It was brilliant, in a sick way. The bank needed the fund to look legitimate, so they could funnel money through the development projects. The fund needed a poster child. My parents needed debt relief. I was the currency that balanced the equation. The next day, I went digging into the social archives. I needed to understand the why. Money was the mechanism, but Marlene operated on a currency of admiration. I went to the Briar Glen Public Library and pulled the microfiche for the society pages from 2009 through 2012. I found them, dozens of them. Marlene Parker hosts Autumn Gala. Marlene Parker speaks on family and faith. I found a profile piece in a local lifestyle magazine, dated May 2010. The headline read, "The Heart of the Home, How One Mother's Choice Changed a Life." I read the text. It was nauseating. Marlene Parker opens up about the challenges and joys of adopting an older child through the Youth Futures Initiative. "We didn't know if we were ready," Marlene says, wiping away a tear. "But when we saw the need, when we saw how much love was waiting to be given, we couldn't say no. We had to step up. We had to be her sanctuary." I was not an older child when they adopted me. I was an infant. But the article implied a rescue narrative, a saving of a lost soul. I read on. "It hasn't been easy," Marlene confesses. "There are days when the trauma of her past surfaces. But we hold her. We tell her she is safe now. We tell her that she is a Parker." I slammed the magazine shut. She had invented a trauma for me. She had painted me as damaged goods so she could play the saint who repaired me. She used the guardian placement to boost her social standing. The more troubled my background appeared in her whispers to friends, the more angelic she looked for raising me. I thought about the times she would sigh loudly at dinner parties when I was a teenager, the way she would touch my arm and give a brave, tight smile to the guests, as if suppressing a great burden. She wasn't protecting me. She was marketing her own martyrdom. I needed to confirm the moral architecture of this lie. I needed to know if anyone had tried to stop her. I drove to the outskirts of town, to a small stone church that had been fashionable in the 90s but was now struggling to fill its pews. Pastor Raymond Cole was in his office. He was an old man now, his hair white, his hands spotted with age. He had been the Parker family's spiritual advisor for 20 years. He had baptized me, Lila, he said, looking up from his Bible study notes. "I haven't seen you since Christmas Eve service." I sat down. The leather chair creaked. "I know everything." "Pastor," I said. His smile faltered. "Everything? I know about the fund. I know about the settlement. I know that my adoption was part of a financial arrangement to save my parents from bankruptcy." Pastor Cole took off his glasses. He rubbed his eyes. He did not look surprised. He looked relieved. I wondered when this day would come. He said quietly, "You knew?" I asked. "I knew enough." He said, "Marlene, she came to me, years ago, right around the time the fund was dissolving. She was terrified." "Terrified of what?" "Of losing it all." He said, "She told me there were legal threats, that people were asking questions about the scholarship money, about the placement fees. She said she felt trapped. And what did you tell her? I asked. I told her the truth is the only way to freedom, he said. I told her to confess, to go to the authorities, admit her part, and protect you from the fallout. And? He sighed. She couldn't do it. She said it would ruin everything. She said the town looked up to her. She said you looked up to her. She chose the silence. She chose to maintain the image rather than cleanse the soul. He looked at me with deep sadness. I failed her. Lila. I should have pressed harder. But she was so convincing. She made it sound like she was doing it for you, to keep your world stable. She didn't do it for me, I said. She did it because she liked the applause. Pastor Cole nodded slowly. Perhaps. Vanity is a powerful drug. I stood up. Thank you. Pastor? For what? He asked. I did nothing. For confirming that she had a choice. I said, I met Sandra Voss in a parking lot behind an abandoned cinema. It felt cliché. But she insisted. She handed me a USB drive. This is the raw audio, she said. The whistleblower. I found the backup file. I plugged it into my car's console. The voice filled the small space. It was the same nervous man I had heard on the snippet, but this was a longer segment. They call it the community shield. That is the internal term. Vane uses it in the memos. They find a family with status, a family that people trust. They move the money through them. They use a private placement, a kid, usually, as the anchor. It makes the whole thing look untouchable. Who is going to audit a charity that is saving babies? Who is going to question the finances of a family that just took in a hardship case? I froze. Private placement used as a community shield. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photocopied page I had received in the mail. The anonymous note, Clause 14. Placement of the minor child. Executed under private agreement to ensure anonymity. The whistleblower used the exact same terminology. Community shield, private placement. This wasn't just a scam. It was a structural design. I was the shield. My body, my life, my story. It was the armor that protected Thomas Vane and Northwind Savings from regulatory scrutiny. I looked at Sandra. Who was the whistleblower? I asked. She shook her head. He never gave me his real name. But he knew the internal codes. He knew about the shield. I pocketed the drive. I have enough. I said. I texted my father. Meet me at the park. The bench by the duck pond. Come alone. If you tell Mom. I released the files to the IRS. He was there 10 minutes early. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was wearing a tracksuit, which was jarring. Grant Parker never wore athletic clothes unless he was playing tennis. I sat down next to him. I didn't look at him. I watched the ducks fighting over a piece of bread. Marlene knew. I said, it wasn't a question. Grant nodded. He was staring at his hands. She knew everything. He whispered, she used the social capital. I said, she used the Savior Mother narrative to get into the galas, to get the magazine profiles. Grant flinched. She needed to feel important. He said, when the money started to go when I lost the firm, she felt invisible. The adoption gave her a spotlight, and you let her do it. I said. Grant turned to me. His eyes were red-rimmed. You do not understand. Lila. She gave me an ultimatum. What kind of ultimatum? It was 2009. He said, the bank was calling every day. We were 3 months behind on the mortgage. Vane had just made the offer. The deal to use the house. To use the story. I hesitated. I didn't want to involve you. And Marlene packed a bag. He said, she stood in the foyer. She said, if you do not fix this, Grant, I am leaving. I am taking Lila, and I am leaving, and I will tell everyone you failed us. He began to cry, a quiet, leaking despair. I couldn't lose you, he said. I couldn't lose her. So I signed the papers. I became the managing contact for the LLC. I let Vane use our accounts. I let them write the scholarship checks. He looked at me, imploring. I did it to keep the family together. Lila, I swear, you did it to keep your wife, I said coldly. You sacrificed my dignity to keep a woman who treats you like an accessory. He didn't argue. He just wept. I stood up. I'm going to end this. Dad, I said. How? He asked, looking up in panic. Are you going to the police? I looked at the ducks. A small child was throwing bread into the water, laughing. If I go to the police, I said, the investigation will drag on for years. They will freeze the assets of everyone involved. Not just you, the other families. The people who donated $500 to the fund because they thought they were helping kids. The people who work at the bank who had nothing to do with this. I thought about the collateral damage. Scorched earth would feel good. It would burn Marlene to the ground, but it would burn the town too. I am not going to the police yet. I said, I am going to the source. I drove home and called Devin Hart. I want to hold the petition. I said, Lila, the clock is ticking. He warned. I know, I said, but I have a better idea. If we file now, Northwind lawyers will bury us in motions. They will seal everything tighter. I need to force a confession first. I need them to break. How? I am throwing a party. I said, I planned the gathering for Saturday. My birthday redo. I sent the invitations via text. Short, specific. I want to move past the drama. Please come to my apartment for a small, private dinner. Just family and close friends. We need to heal. I invited Marlene, Grant, Aunt Celeste, Naomi, and then I added 2 more names to the guest list. Though I didn't tell my parents, Devin Hart, Sandra Voss. I spent Friday cleaning my apartment. I scrubbed the counters until they gleamed. I ordered catering. Simple, high-end comfort food. I bought wine. I was building a stage set. I wanted Marlene to feel comfortable. I wanted her to feel like she had won, like I had come crawling back to the fold, ready to be the good daughter again. I placed the table settings with precision. At the head of the table, where Marlene would sit, I placed a single manila folder. It wasn't the petition. It wasn't the lawsuit. It was a document I had found in the bottom of the truth box, something I had overlooked the first time. It was a handwritten letter from Marlene to Thomas Vane, dated 1993. I had found it tucked inside the back of a photo frame in my room, a frame that had held my baby picture. I laid the folder on the placemat. Saturday evening arrived. The sky was clear. A sharp, cold winter night. Marlene arrived 20 minutes early. Of course she did. She wanted to inspect the venue. She wanted to establish dominance before the other guests arrived. I opened the door. She was wearing a cashmere wrap and a tentative smile. She held a bottle of wine. Lila. She said, Mom. I said, come in. She walked into the apartment, her eyes scanning the room. She noted the fresh flowers, the candles, the clean surfaces. She relaxed visibly. This is lovely, darling, she said. I am so glad you came to your senses. We have been so worried about you. I took her coat. I just want peace. Mom, I said, like you always say. Exactly, she said, patting my cheek. Family is everything. We forgive and we move on. She walked toward the dining table. Oh, you have assigned seating? She asked. Seeing the name cards? Yes, I said. You are at the head? She smiled. A distinct, satisfied smirk. The queen back on her throne. She walked to the chair. She saw the folder. What is this? She asked. A gift? Open it, I said. She set her wine glass down. She flipped open the folder. I watched her face. It was a letter written on her personal stationery. The cream paper was yellowed with age, but the ink was dark blue and unmistakable. Her handwriting, the looping, aristocratic script she was so proud of. Dear Thomas, we are in agreement. The private placement is the best path. Grant is worried about the optics, but I have assured him that with your support, this child will be a blessing to our standing in the community. We are ready to proceed with the arrangement as discussed. The clean slate begins now. Sincerely, Marlene. She stared at the letter. Her hand went to her throat. Where did you get this? She whispered. Her voice was not the voice of the socialite. It was the voice of a woman standing on a trapdoor. It was in my baby frame. I said, Behind the picture of me you liked so much. The one where I looked hopeful. Marlene looked up. Her eyes were wide. Terrified. I didn't think you kept it, she said. I thought I destroyed it. I stepped closer. You didn't destroy it, Mom. You hid it, just like you hid me. The doorbell rang. Marlene jumped. She looked at the door, then back at me. Who is that? She hissed. The guests. I said, I didn't invite them to celebrate. Mom, I invited them to witness. I walked to the door and opened it. Grant stood there, looking pale. Aunt Celeste was behind him, clutching her purse. Naomi was there, stone-faced. And behind them, Devon Hart in a suit and Sandra Voss, holding her digital recorder. Come in, I said. We are just getting started. I turned back to Marlene. She was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The letter lay open in front of her like a verdict. She looked at the folder. She looked at the handwriting. Her own indisputable proof of intent. She realized then that the tax benefits joke was the least of her problems. She hadn't just committed fraud. She had documented it, and I had the paper. The apartment was quiet. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of the restaurant where this had all begun 4 days ago. It was a precise, calculated silence. I had set the table with intentional mediocrity. There were no linen napkins, no crystal stemware, no centerpieces of white roses. I had put out a stack of paper plates, a carafe of black coffee, and a store-bought vanilla sheet cake in its plastic clamshell container. This was not a celebration. It was a deposition. My guests sat around the table in various states of unease. My mother, Marlene, sat at the head, her hands folded over the manila folder I had placed there earlier. She looked like a queen who had been forced to sit on a milk crate. Her posture was rigid, her eyes darting between the lawyer, Devon Hart, and the reporter. Sandra Voss, my father, Grant, sat to her right, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained a portal to another dimension where he was brave. Aunt Celeste sat next to him, shredding a paper napkin into snow. Naomi was on my left, her laptop open, ready. I stood at the other end of the table. I felt calm. It was the icy, functional calm I used when presenting a restructuring plan to a failing board of directors. Before we begin, I said, my voice steady, I have one rule. No one shouts. No one leaves. If you walk out that door before I'm finished, Devon will file the petition to unseal the court records tomorrow morning. Marlene let out a short, dismissive laugh. This is ridiculous. Lila, she said, you are holding us hostage over a birthday cake? I am holding you accountable. Mom, I said, and since you made a public spectacle of my life on Tuesday, I am correcting the record in private on Saturday. I nodded to Naomi. She turned her laptop screen so everyone could see. It displayed a simple timeline. Tuesday night, you told a room full of people that you adopted me for tax benefits. I began. You played it as a joke, a little gauche humor about the IRS, but it wasn't a joke, was it? It was a confession disguised as comedy. I walked around the table, pacing slowly. We are going to look at the math, I said, because the math does not lie. I pointed to the first date on the screen. 1993. In 1993. I was placed in your home. I said, there was no agency, there was no social worker. There was a private agreement facilitated by Thomas Vane and the Youth Futures Fund. Marlene rolled her eyes. We went through a facilitator. It was common back then. You are making it sound sordid. I ignored her. I pointed to the next date. 2009. In 2009, the housing market crashed. I said, Grant's architecture firm went under. You were carrying 2 mortgages, credit card debt, and a lifestyle you could not afford. You were insolvent. Grant flinched. Marlene stiffened. And then, I continued. A miracle happened. You entered into a partnership with Lake Harrow Properties, LLC. Grant became the managing contact, and suddenly, the foreclosure notices stopped. Grant looked up. His face was gray. Lila, he whispered. Please. I turned to him. Tell her. Dad, I said. Tell her about the deal. Grant looked at Marlene. She was glaring at him, willing him to be silent. But the presence of the lawyer and the reporter had broken the seal. He knew this wasn't going away. We managed the property, Grant said, his voice cracking. For the fund. And what did you get in return? I asked. Grant swallowed hard. Debt relief, he said. They covered the arrears. They restructured the loans. I nodded. So the adoption wasn't just about a child. I said, it was about collateral. By 2009, I was 16. I was a student. I was articulate. I was the perfect poster child for the fund. You traded my image, my success story, for a bailout. Marlene slammed her hand on the table. The plastic cake container rattled. Oh, stop it, she cried. She tried the first defense. Humor. She let out a high-pitched, incredulous giggle. You make us sound like villains in a movie. Traded your image. Darling, we took a few photos for a charity brochure. We supported a good cause. Since when is charity a crime? Since the charity is a money laundering operation, Sandra Voss said from the corner. Marlene whipped her head around. Who is she? She is the journalist who interviewed the whistleblower in 2013. I said. Marlene's smile faltered. She shifted to the second defense. Tears. Her eyes filled up instantly. Her chin trembled. We did it for you. Lila, she sobbed, pressing a tissue to her nose. We were going to lose the house, your childhood home. We wanted to protect you. We didn't want you to have to move schools. We didn't want you to feel the shame of bankruptcy. She looked around the table, seeking allies. Grant and I sacrificed our pride to keep a roof over your head. She wept. And this is how you repay us? By interrogating us? By bringing strangers into our home to humiliate us? Aunt Celeste looked down, biting her lip. The tears were effective. They always were. I didn't blink. You didn't do it for me. Mom, I said. I picked up a document from the table. It was the mortgage modification record Naomi had found. I read the date. March 2011. This modification reduced your principal by 60%. I said, that is $400,000 of forgiveness. That money didn't go to my tuition. It didn't go to my clothes. It went to your equity. You saved the house for yourselves. I was just the tenant who paid the rent with her face. Marlene stopped crying. The tears evaporated as if a switch had been flipped. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated venom. The third defense. Attack. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed. The room went deadly silent. We took you in when no one wanted you. She spat. We gave you a name. We gave you a life. You would be nothing without us. You would be trash in a foster system. And now you sit here, with your fancy job and your lawyer, judging us? You have no idea what it takes to survive in the real world. You think you are so superior? You are just a product of our hard work. There it was. A product. Grant put his head in his hands. Marlene, stop, he groaned. No, Marlene shouted. I am sick of her high and mighty attitude. She thinks she is the victim? We are the victims. We raised a viper. I looked at her. She was ugly in her rage, but she was real. This was the woman behind the mask. I am not a victim. Mom, I said quietly. And I am not a viper. I am a witness. I turned to Devin. Show them the file. I said. Devin Hart opened his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper with a heavy seal at the top. This is the response from the Vital Records Department, Devin said. His voice was a calm baritone that cut through Marlene's screeching. Lila petitioned to see her original birth certificate. The request was denied. Marlene scoffed. Because it is a closed adoption. That is standard. It was denied because the file is sealed under a proprietary protection order. Devin corrected. He slid the paper across the table to Marlene. Look at the petitioner. Mrs. Parker? Marlene looked down. She squinted at the text. Petitioner. Northwind Holdings. Legal Division. She frowned. Northwind? The bank? I watched her face. She looked genuinely confused. You didn't seal the file. Mom, I said, I don't understand. She stammered. The adoption was private. Thomas handled it. Thomas Vane worked for the fund. I said, but the fund was just a front. The real money, the real leverage, belonged to the bank. Northwind Savings. I leaned in, my hands flat on the table. When you signed that settlement in 2011, when you agreed to let them use the success story narrative to cover up the real estate fraud, you didn't just sign away your debt, you signed away me. Marlene looked up. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with sudden fear. What do you mean? She whispered. I mean, I am not just your daughter in the eyes of the law. I said, I am an asset protected by a corporate non-disclosure agreement. The bank sealed my records because my existence proves they were laundering money through the adoption program. Marlene looked at Grant. Grant? She said. Did you know this? Grant looked up. He looked terrified. Vane said it was for protection. Grant whispered. He said if the files were sealed, no one could ever take her away from us. He lied. Dad, I said, he sealed them so no one could ever link the child to the check. The room felt cold. Marlene wasn't acting anymore. She was scared. She realized she was not the puppet master she thought she was. She was just another puppet, tangled in strings she couldn't see. Sandra Voss stepped forward. She placed her digital recorder on the table, right next to the store-bought cake. I want you to hear something. Mrs. Parker, Sandra said. She pressed play. The voice of the whistleblower filled the room. It was tinny, distorted, but clear enough. They call it the community shield. They find a family with status. They use a private placement as the anchor. It makes the whole thing look untouchable. We have files on them, placement agreements. We own their stories. We own their stories. Marlene stared at the recorder. Her hand went to her mouth. They own us? She whispered. They own the lie. I said, and because you built your whole life on that lie. Yes, they own you. I walked back to the head of the table. I picked up the timeline Naomi had created. But here's the twist. Mom, I said, they don't own me. Not anymore. I pulled a folder from my bag. It contained my resume, my transcripts, my performance reviews from Alder Rowe Strategies. For years, I wondered why I felt like I had to be perfect. I said, why I had to get the best grades, why I had to win the awards. I thought I was earning your love. I dropped the folder on the table, but I wasn't just earning love. I was earning credibility for the fund. Every time I succeeded, you and Vane used it to validate the program. Look at Lila P. Look how well the system works. I looked at Marlene. My success was your cover story. You didn't just use my childhood, you used my adulthood. You turned my hard work into retroactive proof that your fraud was actually charity. Marlene slumped in her chair. She looked small. The grandeur was gone. The socialite armor had dissolved. I didn't know it went that deep. She whispered. Her voice was fractured, broken into jagged little pieces. I wanted to be someone. She looked at me, her eyes wet. But this time it wasn't a performance. It was a confession. I was invisible. Lila. She said, before you, before the fund, I was just Grant's wife. I was just a woman with a fading house and no legacy. When Vane offered us the arrangement, when he said we could be the face of the movement, I felt seen. She reached out a hand, but pulled it back before she touched the folder. I loved the admiration. She admitted, God help me. I loved it. I loved walking into a room and having people look at me like I was a saint. It was a drug. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I had to keep the story going. I had to make sure you were perfect, because if you weren't perfect, the story fell apart. She looked at Grant, then back at me. I told myself it was love. She said, I told myself that pushing you, molding you, controlling you, that was how a mother loved a child. That isn't love. Mom, I said, that is possession. Marlene nodded slowly. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup, and she didn't lift a hand to wipe them away. I know, she whispered. I know that now. The room held the silence for a long moment. It was heavy, sad, and final. Grant spoke up. His voice was stronger than it had been all night. "What happens now?" he asked. "Are you going to the police? Are you going to destroy us?" I looked at them. My parents, two people who had sold me to buy a reputation. I looked at Aunt Celeste, who had stayed silent to keep the peace. I looked at the paper plates and the cheap cake. I could burn them down. I could release the files to the press. I could watch the police cars pull up to this house and drag them out in handcuffs. It would be cinematic. It would be revenge in its purest form. But it would also destroy the innocent. It would hurt the people who worked at the bank who knew nothing. It would hurt the small donors. It would turn me into a spectacle again. I made a choice. I picked up the petition Devin had prepared. "I am not going to the press." I said, "I am not going to smear you on the evening news. I am not going to give the neighbors the show they are waiting for." Marlene let out a breath, a sound of desperate relief. "But," I continued, raising my hand, "I am not staying silent." I handed the folder to Devin. "On Monday morning, Devin is submitting a formal packet to the State Attorney General and the federal banking regulators. It contains the whistleblower tape, the emails from Grant's hard drive, the mortgage modification records, and my testimony regarding the false marketing." Grant went pale again. "That will trigger an audit." "Yes," I said. "It will trigger a massive audit. Northwind will be investigated. The fund's legacy assets will be frozen. And your name, Dad, as the managing contact for the LLC, will be in the center of it. But," Marlene stammered, "the scandal, the shame." I looked at her coldly. "The shame is yours to carry now. Mom, not mine." I walked to the door and opened it. The cold night air rushed in, cleansing the stale atmosphere of the apartment. "You will likely lose the house," I said. "The bank will have to liquidate assets to pay the fines. You will lose the country club membership. You will lose the status you sold me to keep." I looked at them one last time. "But you will be free of the lie, and so will I." I gestured to the hallway. "You can leave now." Marlene stood up. She looked shaky, unmoored. She gathered her coat, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She looked at me, searching for some sign of forgiveness, some hint that she could charm her way back into my good graces. She found nothing but a mirror reflecting her own choices. "Lila," she said softly. "Goodbye, Marlene," I said. She flinched at the use of her first name. It was a severing, a demotion from mother to defendant. She walked out the door. Grant followed her, pausing for a second to look at me. He opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing there were no words left that hadn't been bought and paid for. He walked out. Aunt Celeste followed, giving my hand a quick, trembling squeeze. Devin and Sandra packed up their files. "We have a lot of work to do on Monday," Devin said. "I know," I said. They left. Naomi was the last one. She stood up and closed her laptop. "You did it," she said. I looked at the empty table, the untouched cake, the paper plates. "I did." I said, "How do you feel?" I took a deep breath. I inhaled the scent of the vanilla cake and the cold air from the open door. I felt light, not happy, exactly, but untethered. The strings were cut. "I feel real," I said. Naomi smiled. She hugged me, fierce and solid, then walked out into the night. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I walked back to the table and picked up the folder with my name on it. Lila Parker. I took out a pen and crossed out the last name. I didn't know what name I would choose yet. Maybe I would keep Parker as a trophy of what I had survived. Maybe I would find the name of the girl in the blue dress before she was sold. But for tonight, I was just Lila. I picked up a fork and took a bite of the store-bought cake. It was sweet, artificial, and cheap. It tasted like the truth. Thank you so much for listening to Lila's story. It has been a journey through the secrets that hide behind the closed doors of perfect families, and I hope the ending gave you the same sense of justice it gave me. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please drop a comment below with your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this series and want to hear more dramas about family secrets, betrayal, and the fight for truth, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And finally, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Lila made the right choice by choosing a legal audit over public revenge? Would you have forgiven Marlene and Grant? Share your opinions in the comments in English. I read every single one. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next story.